Detective Azubike Ngozi parked her tattered sedan next to the yellow tape that already encircled half the block on Industrial Street. It was 7 in the morning, and the October sun was barely breaking through the gray clouds over Millsboro. The cold wind fluttered the sparse leaves on the old oak trees that grew along the roadside. She pulled her jacket tighter against her body and headed toward a white van with Terrence Satellite Systems written on the side. Officer Jenkins stood at the back door of the vehicle, writing something down in a notepad. His young face was pale, apparently not used to such scenes yet. When he saw Ngozi, he nodded in relief and stepped aside. "What have we got?" the detective asked, pulling on latex gloves and wrinkling her nose at their foul odor. Terrence Adebayo, 28 years old. Body was discovered by a neighbor at 6 a.m. when he was walking his dog. Guy worked with satellite equipment, apparently slept in the van. Neighbors said he did that sometimes. Ngozi peered through the open driver's door. What she saw made her whistle through her teeth. The body of a young black man leaned back in the seat, head thrown back, eyes wide open and staring at nothing. His hands hung lifelessly down, fingers slightly bent, as if he were trying to grab something at the last moment. His dark blue work uniform was riddled with holes and dark stains of dried blood that had become embedded in the fabric and blackened overnight. "How many wounds?" she asked, stepping carefully around the car, careful not to step on the shell casings scattered on the asphalt. 17. The forensics expert had already taken a preliminary look. All in the chest and abdomen, shot by someone who wanted to kill for sure. Not a single accidental shot to the arm or leg. Ngozi slowly walked around the van, studying every detail. The white paint on the sides was clean, no scratches. Terrence had obviously taken care of his vehicle. The back bumper had stickers from the local baseball team and Sunshine Daycare. There were shell casings on the pavement. Lots of shell casings. She bent down and counted the ones that were visible. Exactly 17 shiny brass cylinders formed a careless circle around the car, as if a gunman had walked around the van, methodically emptying the clip. The detective pulled a business card out of her pocket and transcribed the address from the victim's driver's license. Maple Street, number 318, a normal residential neighborhood of working middle-class families. Time to talk to the widow and find out what secrets Terrence Adebayo's seemingly idyllic family life was hiding. The glove compartment revealed a leather wallet with $300 in large bills and credit cards. On the victim's wrist gleamed a gold watch, clearly not a cheap fake. "No," she said firmly, straightening up and rubbing her lower back. Someone really wanted Terrence Adebayo dead. 17 bullets is not a robbery gone wrong. It's an execution, and an execution with extreme cruelty. She straightened up and looked around. Industrial Street was on the outskirts of the city, where the residential buildings ended and the warehouses and machine shops began. It was mostly one-story buildings. Some people had converted old stores into housing, some had built cheap houses for the workers of local businesses. The perfect place to kill someone relatively quietly, but there were still neighbors. And judging by the number of shots fired, the killer didn't particularly care about noise. "Who found the body?" Ngozi asked, pulling out of her pocket the worn notebook that had served her well for 8 years. "Roger Kimbrough, lives at number 42. Retired, walks his pit bull every morning. He says around midnight he heard something that sounded like firecrackers going off, but thought it was local teenagers having fun. Only in the morning did he realize what it was." Ngozi nodded and headed towards a small one-story house painted a pale yellow. The paint was peeling in a few places and the roof was in need of repair, but the yard was clean and the small garden was neatly trimmed. An elderly black man in a shabby bathrobe smoked on the porch. A large ash-colored dog lay beside him, wagging its tail lazily and watching the police work. "Mr. Kimbrough?" "Detective Ngozi, Millsboro PD." "Terrible story." The man shook his head, taking a drag on a cheap cigarette. His hands were shaking slightly, whether from cold or nerves. "Terrence was a good guy. Sometimes fixed my satellite dish for free when he saw I was having trouble with the signal. Never charged me anything for it, said it was a neighborhood thing. Tell me what happened last night. From the beginning, take your time. Kimbrough rubbed his bald head and thought, squinting against the smoke of his cigarette. I went to bed at 12:30 as usual. I watched the evening news, then brushed my teeth and went to bed. Bullet. He nodded at the dog. Started to get restless around midnight. He whined, scratched at the door, walked around the house. Then I heard pops. 15, 20, one after the other. Quick as if someone was clapping their hands. I thought it was the boys setting off firecrackers at the warehouse. They hang out there sometimes at night. You sure you remember the time? Well, I didn't look at my watch, but it wasn't long after midnight. Maybe 10, 15 minutes. No more than that. Did you hear any cars? Anybody coming and going? Kimbrough took a drag and exhaled slowly. You know, I was thinking about it all the way back before you got here. There was definitely a car. I heard the engine running. Not very quiet. Like an old car. And then, after the shots were fired, another one came by. Or left. I'm not sure. I was in bed with the windows closed. Did you go out to look? No. These days it's best to mind your own business, especially at night. Bullet whimpered for another 10 minutes and then he calmed down. I went to walk him this morning and I saw Terrence's van. The door was open and he was in there. The man grimaced and put out his cigarette on the porch railing. Called 911 right away. Good thing Bullet woke me up, or who knows when the body would have been found. Did Terrence park here a lot? Sometimes. Once or twice a week, maybe more. He's got a wife and little girl at home and he works late. Said he didn't want to wake them up when he got in late from his calls. He slept in the van. He had a bed set up, mattress, pillow, even a camp stove. How's he been acting lately? Did you notice anything strange? Kimbrough scratched his chin with gray stubble. Well, he'd always been a quiet guy. But the last few weeks? I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but he seemed tense. He smiled when he said hello, but his eyes were sad. And last week I saw him on the phone for a long time. He was standing by the van, pacing back and forth. He was raising his voice, but I couldn't make out the words. Ngozi wrote down the statement and thanked the man. She went around a few more houses on the street, but no one else had anything useful to report. The house across the street was occupied by a deaf old woman who had not even known what had happened until the police arrived. The house on the left had been empty for months. The owner had died, and the heirs couldn't decide what to do with the property. Another neighbor, a young mother with 2 children, said she heard some noise at night but thought it was fireworks. Someone's birthday party. Returning to the van, the detective noticed how neatly the tools were laid out in the back of the vehicle. Each wrench was in its place in a special case. Cables were coiled into even rings. Small parts were sorted into plastic boxes. Terrence clearly cared for his equipment, kept everything in perfect order. On the dashboard was a photograph in a simple silver frame, a smiling young woman with a baby in her arms. Ngozi gingerly picked up the frame and examined the picture. A beautiful young woman of about 25 with short hair was holding a chubby baby girl in a pink dress. Both were smiling into the lens, looking happy. On the back of the frame, the detective found an inscription in neat handwriting. "Shaylin and Aya are my favorite girls." She returned the photograph to its place and once again scrutinized the interior. There was no sign of a struggle. No broken glass, no scratches on the plastic, no torn upholstery. Blood only on the driver's seat and the floor on his side. Terrence didn't fight back. Either he knew the shooter and didn't expect an attack, or he'd been caught off guard in his sleep. Detective, CSI Hawthorne, who was working near the body, called out to her. Interesting detail. Judging by the location of the wounds and the angle of entry, the bullets were fired at very close range, almost point-blank range. And look at this. He showed her a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a broken cell phone, a modern smartphone, screen completely shattered, case cracked. Found it under the seat. Looks like it fell and shattered during the shooting. Might be able to retrieve recent calls and texts. Technicians can do wonders with these things. What's the caliber of the bullets? 9mm, standard caliber for most handguns. Bullets were found in the seat back and the doors. The shooter was standing outside the car. Ngozi picked up the bag and shook it. The phone screen was completely shattered, but the machine itself might contain important information about the last hours of Terrence's life. Send it to the technical department, have them try to extract the data, and tell them to hurry. The first 24 hours are the most important in a case like this. She looked around again. 17 bullets at point-blank range wasn't a random murder or a robbery. Someone hated Terrence Adebayo so much that they emptied an almost full clip of gun into him, or wanted to send someone a very clear message about what happens to people who cross the wrong people. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she tried not to cry loudly so as not to frighten the baby. Aya sensed the motherly tension and began to whimper. How did this happen? An accident? A heart attack? Unfortunately, Terrence was killed. We're investigating the case, and I need to ask you some questions. Shalene turned even paler, her hands trembling. Jenkins, she called to the officer, have a tow truck take the van to the station and find every security camera in a 2-block radius. Check stores, gas stations, banks, anywhere the killer's car might have been spotted. Maybe we'll get lucky and see who came here last night. The sun rose higher, and the gray morning began to slowly turn into an overcast day. Leaves rustled underfoot. The wind carried the smell of smoke from the chimneys of neighboring houses. Azubike Ngozi got into her car and started the engine. She had the most difficult conversation in the case ahead of her. She had to inform the young mother that the father of her child was never coming home again. Maple Street was strikingly different from the industrial suburb where Terrence's body had been found. There were neat 2-story houses with small front gardens, children's bicycles in the driveways, and pots of fall flowers on the porches. House number 318 looked like many others in the neighborhood. Beige siding, dark green shutters, a small porch with white railings. Only the children's toys on the lawn gave away that a family with a small child lived here. Ngozi parked at the sidewalk and sat in the car for a few seconds, gathering her thoughts. She had reported the deaths of loved ones dozens of times over her years as a detective, but it never got easier, especially when it involved young families with children. She stepped up onto the porch and pressed the bell. Light footsteps were heard from the house. Then a woman's voice asked, "Who is it?" "Detective Ngozi, Millsboro Police. I need to speak to Shalene Okafor." The door opened and a young woman appeared on the doorstep, the same woman who had been in the photograph in Terrence's van. Only now she looked tired. Her hair was carelessly gathered into a ponytail, and she was wearing a housecoat over her jeans. In her arms, she held a little girl who was sleepily rubbing her eyes with her fists. "What's wrong?" Shalene's voice was immediately alarmed. "Was Terrence in an accident? Can I come in? We'd better talk inside." Shalene stepped back, letting the detective into the small living room. The interior was simple but cozy. A soft sofa with bright cushions, a coffee table with children's books. A TV on the nightstand toys were neatly stacked in a large basket by the window. It smelled of coffee and baby powder. "Sit down, please." Shaylin pointed to the sofa and settled down in the chair opposite, putting her daughter on her lap. The girl looked curiously at the stranger, putting her finger in her mouth. "What happened to Terrence?" Ngozi sat on the edge of the couch and leaned forward. "I'm sorry, but I have to give you the bad news. Terrence is dead. He was found this morning in his work van." Shalene froze as if she didn't understand what she was hearing. Then her face contorted, and she clutched her daughter to her chest. "What? No, that's impossible. I mean, he was supposed to come home last night. I called him, but he didn't answer. I thought he was working late as usual." Ngozi parked at the sidewalk and sat in the car for a few seconds, gathering her thoughts. She had reported the deaths of loved ones dozens of times over her years as a detective, but it never got easier, especially when it involved young families with children. She stepped up onto the porch and pressed the bell. Light footsteps were heard from the house. Then a woman's voice asked, "Who is it?" "Murdered? Why would someone kill Terrence? It's not like he was hurting anyone." "That's what we're trying to find out. When was the last time you saw Terrence? Shalene wiped her tears with the back of her hand and tried to pull herself together. The morning before yesterday. He left for work around 8. Said he'd be late. He had some calls in the suburbs installing satellite TV in a new neighborhood. And he didn't come home last night? No, I was expecting him for dinner, but he didn't show up. It happened sometimes when there was a lot of work to be done or if he had to drive a long way. He'd call and tell me he was staying in the van. But he hadn't called yesterday? Shalene hesitated, shifting her gaze from the detective to the window. No, he didn't. I tried to call him around 9 p.m., but his phone was unavailable. I thought his battery was dead. That's happened too. Ngozi wrote it down in her notebook. So Terrence hadn't been in touch with his family since the morning before yesterday. Either he was very busy with work, or something happened that prevented him from contacting home. Tell us about the last few weeks. Was Terrence acting as usual? Did you notice anything bothering him? Shalene hesitated, rocking her daughter, who was beginning to fall asleep. He was tense. For the last 2 weeks, for sure. He used to always talk about his work, what clients he'd gotten, where he'd had to install equipment. But now he's been quiet. He'd come home, eat dinner, play with Aya, and go to bed early. Did he say anything was bothering him? Problems at work? Money problems? No, nothing specific. When I'd ask, he'd wave it off, say he was just tired. There's more work, that's all. But I know him. I knew him. Shalene's voice trembled. When Terrence was upset, he became withdrawn. And lately, he hardly spoke at all. And his friends? Who did he hang out with, spend time with? He had a few buddies from high school. Sometimes they'd meet at the bar to watch soccer. But for the last month, he didn't go out. He said he was too tired after work. Ngozi looked up from her notebook. What about enemies? People who might hold a grudge against Terrence? Shalene shook her head. I can't imagine. Terrence was a very quiet man. Never quarreled with anyone, never even raised his voice. The only thing was that he sometimes complained about competitors who were dumping prices, overcharging customers. Can you name names? Robbery, Jenkins suggested, glancing nervously at the body. The detective shook her head, peering into the back of the van. Expensive equipment lay untouched. Satellite receivers in neat boxes, skeins of expensive cables, professional tools in special cases, everything was laid out with German pedantry, each thing in its place. No, we lived modestly, but we had enough money. We had a mortgage on the house, but the payments were small. Terrence was making good money, especially in the last few months. He even said we could go on vacation to the seaside soon. So there were no financial problems? On the contrary, last week he brought home $1,500 in cash, said the customer paid for the big rig all at once. I was even surprised. Usually such sums were transferred to a card. Ngozi raised an eyebrow. $150,000 in cash was quite a lot of money for a satellite installation, especially considering that only $300 had been found in Terrence's wallet. Where was that money now? He put it in the bank the next day, said it's best not to keep that kind of money in the house. Did you ever inquire as to who the client was? Shalene shrugged her shoulders. Terrence didn't like to discuss work in detail. He only said the installation was complicated, took all day. Little Aya finally fell asleep in her mother's arms. Shalene carefully got up and carried her daughter into the next room. Ngozi could hear her whispering something softly to the baby as she tucked her into her crib. A few minutes later, Shalene returned, closing the bedroom door. I'm sorry. I had to put her to bed. Of course you did. Tell me, has Terrence gotten any strange phone calls in the last few days? Messages? Well, Shalene hesitated. The night before last, when he was still at home, someone called his cell phone. He answered, but he was very quiet. I was in the kitchen, I couldn't hear, and when I asked who was calling, he said a client was confirming the details of tomorrow's job. What time was that? Around 10 p.m. I thought it was strange. I don't usually get calls that late for work. How long did the call last? 15 minutes at least. Terrence even came out on the porch, saying the connection was bad at the house. Ngozi felt this was an important detail. Work calls rarely lasted that long, especially late at night. Shailene, I have to ask, even though it's a sore subject. Did Terrence have any relationship problems? Were you two fighting? The young woman tensed and looked away. No, we didn't fight. In fact, we were very happy. We were planning to get married next spring. But something's been bothering him these past weeks, hasn't it? I don't know. Shailene raised her voice, but then she realized and lowered her tone. He didn't tell me what was bothering him. Maybe tax problems or something else work-related. Men don't always share their problems. Ngozi noticed the change in Shailene's demeanor. She became nervous, began to rub the edge of her robe. Either she really didn't know anything about Terrence's problems, or she was hiding something important. Okay. Do you have anyone who can help with the baby? Relatives? Friends? My mom lives in the next town over. I haven't called her yet. I don't know how to tell her. I don't have a lot of local friends. We just moved to Millsboro 2 years ago. Where'd you move from? Detroit. Terrence got a good job offer here, so we decided to start a new life in a small town. It's better for the baby. The detective wrote down the last details and closed her notebook. Shailene, if you think of anything else, any little thing that might help the investigation, be sure to call me. She held out her business card. My number is open 24 hours a day. Shailene took the card with trembling fingers. What's going to happen now? With the body? With the funeral? After the autopsy, the body will be turned over to the funeral home. It'll take a few days. I'll give you contacts of people who will help with the arrangements. As Ngozi reached the car, she looked back at the house. The living room window flashed with the figure of Shailene, who was watching the detective's departure. Something in the young woman's demeanor seemed strange. The grief seemed genuine, but some of the answers sounded too guarded, as if Shailene was afraid to say too much. Ngozi started the car and drove slowly down Maple Street. So far, she had more questions than answers. Terrence Adebayo had been killed with extreme brutality, but the motive remained unclear. 17 bullets was revenge or a message, but for what and to whom? The next morning, Detective Ngozi arrived at the station early, when the corridors were still empty, and only the duty light was on in the conference room. She poured herself a coffee from the machine, a bitter brown liquid that could hardly be called coffee, and settled at her desk with Adebayo's case file. The tech had worked faster than she expected. On the desk lay a printed report of the recovered data from Terrence's shattered phone. The screen had been shattered, but the internal memory had survived, and the technicians had been able to retrieve the call and message history for the past month. Ngozi scrutinized the list of numbers. Most of the calls were work contacts, equipment suppliers, customers, a few calls to Shailene's home, but one number caught her attention. Terrence had received 7 calls from it in the past 2 weeks, with conversations ranging from 5 to 20 minutes in length. The last call had been the day before the murder, at exactly 22 hours and 12 minutes, the same late call that Shailene mentioned. The detective picked up the phone and dialed the caller ID number. I need information on a number. She dictated the digits. Murder case, priority request. 10 minutes later, she had the information. The number was registered to Kwabena Asante, 32 years old, address, Industrial Street, number 124. Interesting. The same neighborhood where the body was found. Ngozi ran the name through the database. Kwabena Asante had a minor criminal record. Administrative violations, 1 arrest for marijuana possession 3 years ago, a case dismissed for lack of evidence. He worked as a longshoreman at a construction materials warehouse called Constructor. But the most interesting thing came when the detective requested Shailene's phone records. Turns out there was heavy phone traffic between her and Kwabena. Over the past month, 23 calls at different times of the day, some lasting half an hour or more. And the calls had started 2 months ago, long before Terrence had become nervous and withdrawn. Ngozi leaned back in her chair and thought. Shalene claimed to know nothing about Terrence's problems, yet she was actively communicating with the man who had been calling her husband in the late evenings. A coincidence seemed unlikely. The constructor warehouse was in an industrial area, a 20-minute drive from the station. Ngozi had gotten there around 11 in the morning. The warehouse area was several large hangars surrounded by a high fence. At the gate sat a guard in an insulated booth. "I'm looking for Kwabena Asante." The detective showed her ID. "Police." The guard, an older man with a gray mustache, perked up. "Kwabena? What did he do?" "Just need to ask a few questions. Where can we find him?" "Hangar 3, unloading cement trucks. Only he's a bit jumpy today. He's had 2 arguments with the foreman." Ngozi walked through the warehouse, past the stacks of bricks and bags of dry mix. A truck was indeed being unloaded in the 3rd hangar. Several workers were hauling heavy sacks on carts, but one stood out, a tall, muscular man in his mid-30s who worked with a kind of nervous energy, tossing the sacks as if they weighed nothing. "Kwabena Asante?" The man turned around. He had a lean face with sharp cheekbones, short hair and piercing dark eyes. Sweat glistened on his forehead despite the cool weather. "Yes, that's me. Who are you?" "Detective Ngozi, Millsboro PD. I need to talk to you." Kwabena froze, clutching another bag of cement tightly in his hands. Ngozi noticed the muscles in his neck tense. "What is there to talk about? I'm at work. I don't have time to talk." "Make time. It's about murder." The word murder came like a blow. Kwabena slowly set the bag on the ground and wiped his hands on his overalls. "Let's go to the office. It's quieter there." The office was a small trailer with a couple of tables and chairs. Kwabena closed the door and gestured for Ngozi to sit down. He himself remained standing, leaning against the wall. "I'm listening." "Terrence Adebayo was murdered last night. Did you know him?" Kwabena blinked several times, as if digesting the information. "Terrence. Murdered. How did that happen?" "Answer my question first. Did you know him?" "I've heard the name. I think he worked with technology, satellites, that sort of thing." Ngozi pulled his cell phone records. "According to your cell phone records, you've spoken to Terrence on the phone 7 times in the last 2 weeks. The last time was the night before last, at 22 hours and 12 minutes. Kwabena's face turned visibly pale. He moved away from the wall and sat down across from the detective. "Okay, yes, we talked sometimes. But it's not what you think." "What do I think?" "I don't know what you think. It's just that we knew each other. We called each other once in a while." "What did you talk about for 20 minutes the night before last?" Kwabena rubbed his face with his hands. "Look, it's hard to explain. We had a business relationship. Terrence would sometimes help me with technical issues. I had old equipment at home, and he'd give me advice on how to set it up. 20 minutes of tune-up advice at 10 out at night? Well, we talked about all sorts of things. Sports, work. Terrence was a normal guy." Ngozi wrote down the answer, though it sounded lame. "Do you know Shalene Okafor?" If Kwabena had been pale before, now his face turned gray. He twitched as if he had received a blow. "Shaylin? Why do you ask?" "Answer the question." I know her, superficially. According to the phone records, you spoke to her 23 times in the last month. Some of those conversations lasted half an hour. That's what you call a superficial acquaintance?" Kwabena stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to the detective. "Okay, we're socializing. We've met on occasion, but it had nothing to do with Terrence's death." "Dating in what way? Romantically?" Long pause. Kwabena looked out the window at the workers who continued to unload trucks. "Yeah. But it started recently, and we were going to call it quits." "Did Terrence know about your affair?" "No, I don't think so." Shalene said he didn't suspect anything. Ngozi sensed that things were taking a new turn. A love triangle is a classic motive for murder. "Where were you the night before last?" Between midnight and 2 a.m.? At home. Sleeping. Can anyone confirm that? No, I live alone. I rent a room in a house on Oak Street. So you have no alibi for the time of the murder? Kwabena turned around. Look, I didn't kill Terrence. Yes, Shalene and I had a relationship, but I would never kill a man over a woman. That's crazy. What if Terrence found out about your relationship and threatened to tell everyone? Or demanded that Shalene choose between you? That never happened. Terrence didn't know anything. Then what did you talk to him about the night before last? Kwabena hesitated, obviously thinking of an answer. He asked about the job, said he was thinking of changing careers, wondered if he needed people in the warehouse. The lie was obvious. Ngozi stood up. Mr. Asante, I suggest you think carefully and remember all the details. Lying in a murder case is a serious offense. I will come to your house tomorrow for a more detailed discussion. As she left the warehouse, the detective reflected on the information she had received. Kwabena Asante was clearly hiding the truth about his relationship with the Adebayo family. But was he the killer? 17 gunshots spoke of extreme rage or hatred. Could a lover have so brutally massacred a rival? On the way back to the station, Ngozi decided to take another drive down Industrial Street where the body had been found. Maybe in the daylight she would be able to spot something that had escaped her attention during the night. She drove slowly along the warehouse, scrutinizing the curbs and yards of the neighboring houses. Outside Roger Kimbrough's house, a child's toy that hadn't been there yesterday was lying on the lawn. Ngozi stopped and approached the house. Mr. Kimbrough, this is Detective Ngozi again. An elderly man stepped out onto the porch with a mug of tea in his hands. Ah, Detective. Have you found the killer? We're working on it. Tell me, do you have any grandchildren? I noticed a child's toy on the lawn. Yeah, my granddaughter visits with my daughter sometimes. Why? Were they here the night before last? No, Suzanne came by 2 days ago. She left her car, I guess she forgot to pick it up. Is Suzanne your daughter? Yes, she lives on the other side of town, but sometimes she comes to see the old man. Can I have her phone number? Maybe she saw something suspicious that night. Kimbrough gave the number and Ngozi called right away. A young woman answered the phone. Hello? Suzanne Kimbrough? Detective Ngozi, Millsboro Police. I'm investigating a murder that happened near your father's house. Yes, my dad told me. It's a terrible story. Tell me, were you in the Industrial Street area the night before last? The night before last? Yeah, I stopped by my dad's house after work. About 9 o'clock, I guess. What time did you leave? Pretty late. Dad was cooking dinner, we had a long talk. I left about 11:30. Ngozi felt a rush of excitement. Did you happen to see anyone suspicious on the street? Unfamiliar cars, people? Well, when I left, there was a woman standing on the corner. Seemed odd. Late for a walk, and she was dressed out of season. Describe her. Young, black, wearing a light jacket, although the evening was cool. She was standing under a streetlight, talking on the phone. I thought maybe her car had broken down, and I wanted to offer to help, but she quickly went somewhere else. Which way? Toward the warehouses. That's where the man was found. Would you be able to identify this woman? I think so. She had short hair, pretty good looking. I remember her because she looked troubled. Ngozi thanked Suzanne and wrote down her contacts. The description matched Shalene Okafor's. It appeared that the widow of the murdered man had been near the crime scene shortly before the murder, even though she claimed to have been home all evening. The detective could feel the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. Shalene had a connection to Kwabena Asante. Terrence had somehow found out about the affair. Maybe he threatened divorce or wanted to take the child away, and as a result, he was shot 17 times in the chest. The next morning, Ngozi sat in the interrogation room with all the evidence she had collected laid out in front of her. Call details, witness statements, crime scene photos. The picture was slowly taking shape, but she had to get the main players to tell the truth. At 8 a.m., she called Shalin. "I need you to come down to the station for more questions," the detective said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "New circumstances have come to light." "Who should I leave the baby with?" Shalin sounded worried. "My mom's not here yet." "Bring her with you. We have a nursery." An hour later, Shalin Okafor sat across from Ngozi in a small room with gray walls and fluorescent lighting. Little Aya slept in the portable cradle her mother had brought. Shalin looked pale and tired. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of a sleepless night. "I want to go over the events of the night before last again," the detective began. "You said you were home all day and expected Terrence for dinner." "Yes, I was." "And you didn't leave the house at 11:30 in the evening?" Shalin jerked as if she'd been punched. "No, I was at home. Why would I have gone out?" Ngozi pulled out a folder with Suzanne Kimbrough's testimony. "I have a witness who saw a woman who looked very much like you on Industrial Street at 11:30 in the evening. She was standing under a streetlight talking on the phone." Shaylin's face turned even paler, but she shook her head stubbornly. "It wasn't me. Maybe someone similar." "The witness is willing to participate in the identification, but before that, I want to discuss another subject with you." Ngozi opened a second folder. "Do you know Kwabena Asante?" The reaction was instantaneous. Shalin flinched as if she had been electrocuted, her hands clenched into fists. "No, I don't know any Kwabena. According to your phone records, you've spoken to him 23 times in the last month. One conversation lasted 42 minutes. Shalin opened her mouth but said nothing. Her breathing quickened. "Shalin, lying only makes things worse for you. I've already spoken to Kwabena. He admitted that you were romantically involved." The woman covered her face with her hands and cried quietly. The room was silent for several minutes, broken only by the measured breathing of the sleeping child. "Yes," Shalin finally whispered. "We had a connection. But that doesn't mean anything. We were going to end it." "How long had it been going on?" 2 months. We met at the grocery store where I work. He'd come in to buy groceries after work. We got to talking. He seemed like a nice guy. "And you started dating even though you lived with Terrence?" Shalin wiped her tears with her sleeve. "It happened on its own. Terrence worked a lot, wasn't home much. I felt lonely. Kwabena was attentive, caring, but I knew it wasn't right." "Did Terrence know about your relationship?" "No, I was careful. We went out when Terrence wasn't home. And the night before last, you went out with Kwabena?" Long pause. Shalin looked down at the floor, tugging at the hem of her blouse. "Yes, we met, but only to talk. I wanted to tell him I couldn't live like this anymore." "Where did you meet?" "Industrial Street by the warehouses. It was quiet. No one could see us." "What time?" "Around 11 cow. Kwabena drove up in his car." Ngozi wrote down her statement, feeling she was getting closer to the truth. "What happened during the meeting?" "We talked about ending the relationship. I said I could no longer deceive Terrence, that he was a good father and did not deserve to be betrayed." "How did Kwabena react?" "He was upset, but he understood my position. We agreed we wouldn't see each other again." "And then what happened?" Shalin was silent, her breathing ragged. "Then Terrence arrived." "Came? How did he know where to find you?" "I don't know. Maybe he followed me, maybe by accident. He showed up in his van and saw us." "What happened next?" Tears flowed down Shalin's cheeks again. She shook her head as if trying to erase the memories. "Terrence got out of the car. He was furious, yelling at me. Said he'd suspected cheating for a long time. Kwabena tried to explain that we were just talking, but Terrence wouldn't listen." "Was there a fight?" "No, Kwabena didn't put up a fight. He just got in his car and drove away. And Terrence..." Shalin's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said some terrible things." "What kind of things?" "That he was gonna file for divorce and take Aya away from me. That he'd tell my mom what a whore I was. that everyone in town would know who I slept with while he was working. Ngozi saw the expression on Shalene's face change from grief to anger. He said I would never see my daughter again, that people like me were not worthy of being mothers. Shalene clenched her fists. And then I don't remember exactly what happened. Try to remember, it's very important. Kwabena left his gun in my car. He kept it in the glove compartment for self-defense. When Terrence yelled at me, called me a whore, I went to my car. I just wanted to go home. But you took the gun. Yeah, I was furious. Terrence kept yelling that I was a worthless mother, that he was going to terminate my parental rights. I yelled at him to shut up. And did you shoot him? Shalene nodded without raising her head. Once. I just wanted to scare him. But he went down. And the other 16 shots? A long pause. Aya stirred in the cradle, but she didn't wake up. I couldn't stop. He lay on the ground, and I thought about how he wanted to take my daughter away from me, how he'd humiliated me. 17 months we were together, 1 shot for every month. There was silence in the room. Ngozi stared at the young woman who had just confessed to killing the father of her child in cold blood. What happened after the shooting? I called Kwabena. He came back and helped me clean up the evidence, wiped down my gun, collected any shell casings he could find in the dark. I went home and took a shower, washed my clothes. Where's the gun now? Kwabena threw it in the river, said it was safer that way. Ngozi closed her notebook and looked at Shalene. Shalene Okafor, you are under arrest for the murder of Terrence Adebayo. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. She read out the full text of the rights and summoned the officers. Shalene did not resist arrest, only asking that someone take care of her daughter until her mother arrived. An hour later, Ngozi and a team of officers arrived at the constructor's warehouse to arrest Kwabena Asante. He tried to escape through the back exit, but was apprehended. Upon arrest, he yelled that he did not kill Terrence, that he only helped hide evidence. At the station, Kwabena admitted his role in covering up the evidence, but insisted that Shalene had committed the murder while under the influence. He corroborated her testimony of 17 shots, 1 for each month of their relationship. She was like a madwoman, he said under questioning, standing over the body and shooting. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. Terrence Adebayo's case was closed a week later. Shalene Okafor was charged with first-degree murder. Kwabena Asante was charged with concealing evidence and accessory after the fact. Little Aya went to live with her grandmother in a neighboring town. Detective Ngozi sat in her office filling out the latest paperwork on the case. 17 bullets in a 17-month relationship. Revenge can take the most unexpected forms. But in the end, justice had been served and the killer had gotten what he deserved. On the table was a photograph of Terrence with his daughter in his arms, found in his van. The young father was smiling into the lens, unaware that in a few months the mother of his child would become his killer. Ngozi picked up her phone and dialed the number for child services. This is Detective Ngozi. On the Adebayo case. Make sure the girl never learns the truth about how her father died. Let her think it was a robbery. She hung up the phone and looked at the childish scribbles she found in the glove compartment of Terrence's van. Aya was drawing flowers for her daddy. The 2-year-old hadn't been orphaned because of an accident or illness. Her own mother had killed her father, methodically putting 17 bullets into him. Ngozi tucked the children's drawings into an envelope marked "to give to Grandma" and closed the folder.